So I was, now on my brand new computer, I said, well, I have one more story about this guy on Martha's Vineyard, at least one, maybe some more. And so while my agent was selling what turned out to be A Beautiful Place to Die, I had, like all writers do, I had started another book. And I remember saying to Shirley, gosh, wouldn't it be great if this was a series? What, almost inconceivable, because we were so stunned. We hadn't even sold the book yet, but as soon as we sold it, we were so shocked that we'd actually sold a book after 20 years, you know. The idea of selling another one seemed highly unlikely. I looked forward to another 20 years before the third book would come out. I'd be in my 80s. And then it came out, and I had never even thought of it as a mystery. Just like I hadn't thought of that first book as a crime novel.
I was going to ask you that, but you sold it to Scribner as a crime novel?
Well, they brought it out as a crime novel, and I didn't know it was a crime novel until they told me, and I didn't know that it was a series until they sent me a copy of that book, and it says something like, Introducing Jeff Jackson, A Martha's Vineyard Mystery. I mean, look at it, shows it, A Martha's Vineyard Mystery.
Implies there'll be
another one, and they hadn't told me. And so, but it turned out to be this series.
Well, it's a lovely series, and you know, it's interesting to me because it sounds when speaking to you as there's a certain, you know, sort of jerkiness in your career and
you bet there is.
Process and all. You'd never know it reading the books. Your books read so smoothly; they just flow along, and they are conversational, and they are fun, and they have a. I try to, you know, to explain to readers and to my students that for me, reading is having a conversation with the author. And we're doing it not by sitting here together or talking on the telephone, but in fact the book, the printed page, is the channel across which our communication is going. And I had read several of your books before I ever met you, so I knew you. We'd had these conversations in an author-reader kind of sense. And I always wonder what the author's going to be like, having had my whole acquaintance on the page. When I meet the author, will they gel? Will I be surprised? Will I be disappointed? Which occasionally happens. And it's a hazard of bookselling, to be perfectly honest with you. I'm really a reader more than I am a bookseller. And I have thought to myself, maybe this is going to be a really downside of this career change in midlife, is that I'm going to now meet some people whose books I've loved, and I'm going to hate them. And it's really going to wreck my pleasure in their books. And happily, that's only in maybe 2 cases,
hasn't
really.
happened very often.
Very seldom. Most writers are wonderful and interesting people, but I always, when I have read them and then I meet them, I feel like I'm bringing this, like, years of acquaintance, you know.
For years.
Yeah, to the table. And particularly with your books, I think that conversation element, I mean, because we talk about cooking, I'm always hungry when I read them. I'm so delighted that occasionally you've let me taste bluefish pate when you've come to see me. You know, we have romance, we have setting. In fact, setting really is almost the main character in this series.
True.
That's why they call it, they don't call it the Jeff Jackson mysteries. This is
Martha's Vineyard mysteries.
Right,
yeah.
and 3 elements, the necessary elements really to make a mystery are plot, character, and setting. Certainly Tony Hillerman's books in the Southwest, I mean, the setting is critical. James Burke has wonderful Louisiana, Sharon McCrum's writes Appalachia, they're, you know, on and on. And I think that Martha's Vineyard is like a living character, along with Jeff and Zeolinda, in your books. Did you intend it to be that way, or did it just come out that way?
Well, one of the things, aside from that, those little cliche elements I told you about, when, you know, the handsome hero and all that, by the way, which I haven't paid much attention to since the first book. That seemed to be, I sort of structured the first book with, I made sure they had all that stuff in, and I haven't paid much attention to that since then. But as far as the vineyard is concerned, I did have a kind of a personal intent, which was to show the Martha's Vineyard that I know. I call it Shirley's Vineyard. Shirley's Vineyard is not the vineyard that most people see when they come to Martha's Vineyard. They come and they see the beaches and they see the yachts and they go out to dinner and they go to cocktail parties and they shop. Shirley and I don't even go downtown in the summertime.
Right.
What we do is get in our Jeep, our 4-wheel drive, and we go to the far reaches and we fish. And when we go beaching, we go way away from the people. And our friends are people who are working stiffs, a lot of them. And the guy, the head maintenance man of the yacht club, is a good friend of ours, lives right up the street, and he helps me with my boats, and we sail a little bit together, and we live a life that is not the life of the normal tourist who comes to Martha's Vineyard. Also, we don't well, there's so many societies in Martha's Vineyard, but we know what those societies are, like they're little societies that live around the Edgartown Great Pond. You wouldn't know they were there.
Really?
There's Oak Bluffs is a major black resort area in the United States. They're a wealthy, well-to-do black families who've been coming there for 100 years. They own large houses, and that just exists as a little entity on the vineyard. In fact, the book I'm trying to revise it, even as we speak. It takes place in Oak Bluffs and involves some of those traditions. But I'm able to talk about those aspects of the island, and I want people to see that island.
Right.
Because people don't know it's there. The clam flats.
So you're going behind the vacationing Martha's Vineyard to the working and living
very
Martha's
much
Vineyard.
so. And I just wanted to see my island, or Shirley's island, mine.
Your wife is from, in fact?
My wife is a
Vineyard?
third-generation islander, and her father was born there, her grandfather was born there, and when we were in graduate school and she was pregnant, we flew her back to Martha's Vineyard so our kids could be islanders, so that my children are fourth-generation islanders. And I'm the only off-islander in the bunch. I'm the off-island gink. It's too late for me to be born on an island, but I did my best to make sure that my children were.
That's marvelous.
Yeah, I was nifty to be born on an island, don't you think?
Absolutely
Yeah.
so. Is it basically a Portuguese?
It's one of the long traditions on Martha's Vineyard. There were British who came initially, usually it was part of the British Crown. And there was a little argument at one time whether Martha's Vineyard belonged to New York or Massachusetts. That was some time back. And then I'm guessing in the 1800s, there were sort of impressive Portuguese migrations that came over to New England and went out to California. A lot of it began to happen during the whaling industry, when whale ships from America would stop in the Azores and pick up crew, and the Portuguese were famous sailors and famous fishermen. In fact, they were fishing off the coast of North America about the same time Columbus was down south. So, and a lot of those people are now settled in fishing ports like Gloucester and Rhode Island, in places in Rhode Island and New Bedford, Massachusetts. There are a large Portuguese population, and a lot of them now live on Martha's Vineyard, mostly from Azorean stock. My wife's mother and father, both, their people came from the Azores.
Well, I think you've done a smashing job with the vineyard, and it's a place that your editor and I have frequently said we'd like to descend upon you together.
You're certainly welcome anytime.
It's very kind of you, just because it sounds from your books, like a place that I would really like to be in. And we're not talking to vacation and be glamorous. I'm talking about going out for bluefish. And your first book, in fact, has a lot to say about fishing. It's almost like reading A River Runs Through It, except not in Montana, but out on the vineyards. So I assume that you, in fact, were writing from your own personal love of, and indeed you are.
Yes, my wife and I are both surf casters, and we pursue the wily blues and cook them, and we've gone through certain years where we were almost professional bluefish catchers. We would catch hundreds of pounds of bluefish during a particular blitz, and then we sold it to the Boston markets, as a lot of people did. But for us, it was just sort of a way to support our fishing habit. We could pay for the plugs that we'd lost and the lines that had been cut and the expenses of fishing. But we're very, very fond of fishing, and we've maintained that interest. We are fisher people. If you ever come to my little house in Martha's Vineyard, across the top of the living room are 9 fishing rods hanging there.
Wonderful. So here we have your guy, Jeff, who is an ex-cop who lives on the vineyard, and he cooks and he gardens and he fishes, and he does from time to time take assignments as an investigator or a security guy or whatever it is. And he has a romance with Zeolinda, who, the more I know Shirley, recognized. She's a beautiful girl. She's an islander. She's a nurse. Portuguese, absolutely. And of course now I see Shirley when I think about Zeolinda. She's a nurse, and you've done that sort of forbidden thing, which is that you have taken this romance along and actually married off your characters.
Yes, I have.
Kind of scary, isn't it?
Well, it was apparently scarier to other people than it was to me. I was, first of all, I didn't know this was going to be a series. So when they have their love affair in the first book, I thought it was going to be a one-night stand. I never thought I'd see him again. And but lo and behold, it's going on for 8 books, and it created a technical problem for me that I had just never even thought about.